Welcome to the breakdown being brought to you by the African National Women's Organization, AMWO, a mass organization underneath the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. The breakdown is a monthly news, analysis, and opinion program, as well as a platform for highlighting guests whose issues spotlight the international plight of colonized women struggling against colonialism. My name is Koko Lewis, and I will be one of your co-hosts for today's broadcast. I'm joined by our host, Yejide president of the African National Women's Organization, and our volunteer producer, Jay Amaechi. Today's breakdown will share news from the African world, highlighting recent struggles in Niger and Haiti. Ohu President Yejide and Jay, I'm excited for today's discussion. I'm fired up. Let's get into it.
Yeah, thank you so much for the intro and just appreciation for everybody who's watching and who will be watching after this post. And just wanted to say this is the first time that we're doing this type of program, news and analysis in the African world. We're really excited to talk about Niger and Haiti and other places in the African world that is, newsing it up and offering our political interpretation of it, as well as what we think about, the future for some of the struggles that are happening right now. So I'm really excited about the discussion, and we're gonna start off with Niger. First of all, what was like? I'm gonna be kind of like the moderator too, and talking like, what was your initial response to Niger?
I mean, I think for me, seeing, of course, I blank out on his name, but seeing that, the military leader in his garb, and he instantly reminded me of Thomas Sankara. Mm-hmm. And that visual, before he even opened his mouth, that visual for me was like, yes, finally. Which, I mean, to be fair, probably is not the best reaction, that someone can just dress up and then instantly be swayed. But then I actually heard their statement, mm-hmm. and I was like, oh, it's time. It's time.
Absolutely. What about you, Koko?
I would say pretty much the same. Like I love his history, period. And so, in history, you learn that things move as a pendulum. Like we go forward, we go back, we go forward, go back, but it's all progressing. I just think that it is time. I think the world itself is over imperialism. I would say the world, as far as the everyday working class, poor people are just, even the middle class are just tired of imperialism and capitalism and colonialism dictating our lives. And this is just what I believe is going to be just the start of, what's to come.
Well, we hope so. I mean, because, we've been excited before about Africa and America and the Caribbean. There's been times in our history where there's been a lot of like movement toward the progress and self-determination of a people. And come to find out, after some of the players got undermined, like it never leads to the point where we are really achieving the paramount, which for us in the African People's Socialist Party is like freedom, right? And so I was also excited by the statement of Traore, who is the leader of Burkina Faso right now, the junta. And I was excited about it. He was talking about imperialism and neocolonialism, but we also can't be, I'm excited about like the trajectory and some of the statements that he's made after that initial statement, which were like, this is what we're going to try to do. We're going to, increase the employment for people. This is how we're going to take over this institution and do X, Y, and Z. So there's like, he had a youth forum to talk about employment for youth, because youth are Africa's future. And those things are really inspiring. But we're talking about something right before we got on about like the US and some other foreign occupiers who are still in Niger and making their moves and playing their position. And one of them was what Koko raised, which was what? The drone.
Yeah, so that, after initially, pretty much after the coup shut down, U.S. France and the other, colonizers that are on the land, they, recently allowed U.S. to continue their missions. But their missions is about 1,000 troops, but their missions are related to drone, surveillance and things like that. And so to me, it's like, I don't want you being the police over here because you really it's policing for imperialism to have U.S. in there. But I understand it's kind of like you can't take on all the colonizers at one time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I realize now that I was mistaking at first General Chiani, who's in Niger, with Captain Traore, and thinking about the differences between the two. General Chiani doesn't really have the sort of, I think, like ideological, like we haven't necessarily heard the full extent of what his ideological approach to the U.S. We know what he thinks about France, but about the U.S., we still don't know. But we do know that there was a summit in South Africa, and if anyone knows anything about Victoria Nuland, who's the coup architect, everywhere she goes, governments fall slightly after. She was in Ukraine in 2014 and another place before that, and apparently she showed up very flustered at a South African event, heads of state event, and basically practically begging other leaders to join her in resisting or talking to Niger and trying to exert some influence. And who knows what the outcome is? At some point, I'm sure I know she went to Niger, and my belief is that she often makes offers that governments can't refuse. Right? You either accept this help or you face the consequences. This help, And as we see with Ukraine, like they accepted the help and they're facing the consequences.
Yeah,
It's both.
That's often what you get
And
when you deal with the U.S.
I think that we've kind of seen the effects of U.S. help, and I hope that the leaders of Niger know better than to make a deal with the devil, because you always end up, making a deal that you can't live with at the end of the day. But also, the U.S. is not easily refused. The U.S. is not easily one that just says, "Oh, you have all of this military equipment. Well, you can just keep it." It's no biggie. That threats were involved, and this is a new government, and I'm hoping that he's thinking strategically. And I know that thinking strategically is not always going to show everybody around that what is happening makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, you have to know all the full range of details to be able to like make sense of it, but if you are only seeing a part of it, then maybe the strategy doesn't look like a strategy, or it looks like just bowing down to the US.
And you raised something before we started about this perception that Africa can't be so, like the perception that Africans who are exerting themselves militarily and politically are always being controlled by somebody else, as opposed to responding to the conditions and that they are experiencing. So, for example, if they start talking about imperialism and neocolonialism, then then all of a sudden we think, oh, Russian influence or something like that. Or if they're allowing this and that, we are being influenced by others. And that's sort of like how the United States government, the indictment the United States government put on the African People's Socialist Party, like we can't speak for ourselves. And so there is always we always have to like fight against that that compulsion to say, like, don't be swayed by this person and that person. But we also know, like, the reality of it, like in Africa is a hotbed for political struggle, and the entire world is in Africa trying to gain footing. And a lot of what's happening in Africa is being manipulated by some actor or another. And it's really the responsibility of African people to be strong in our decisions. If we are saying imperialism be gone, French colonialism get out, then we can't in on say that on one hand, then on the other hand say say, oh, welcome in the other form of imperialism. Like, you know what I mean? Like it has to be very clear. And I think if we see the kind of flip flopping that we've been used to over, my entire lifetime, then it might be, you know, it doesn't instill a lot of confidence. And so, yeah, I meant to say that.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a conspiracy theory, this idea that, like, Black people can't think for ourselves, or we're like mindless automatons, even like the stereotype of like the zombie. Like all of these things are rooted in this idea that like we're just these mechanistic brutes, but there's actually someone else running the scene. There's someone else running the show. And I mean, I think it remains to be seen whether this general is fully to be trusted or not. So I'm not going to say that I 100% know what his intentions are, his background, like what he's trying to accomplish. But yeah, all I know is that like only time will be able to tell when I get more details, when we all get more details. But we have to stay vigilant, like vigilant, like truly.
Yeah. We have to hold our own. We have to hold us and our people responsible. We not just gonna. Just because they have this uprising against the colonialist powers that are in their immediate, because this is very immediate. Like that. Just because it's they're focusing on who's in front of them, that doesn't mean that we can't hold them accountable as a people. Like, hey, I mean, we have to show support and be in solidarity, but for them breaking free from this colonizer. But it's like we have to support them with, okay, we here in the States, in England, or wherever wherever our people are as a collective. Hold them responsible, give them the support so that they don't get, we can crumble under pressure when we don't have support, and it's not just a one person or one man, leading this.
Let's talk about that support though, because the thing that makes Niger so special, I think, is just that Mali and Burkina Faso is like, you mess with them, you mess with us, son.
Yes, I love that. I'm so excited about that.
That was the result of other African countries coming to the defense of the colonizer by saying, hey, if you do this, if you oust the French, we may come up in there, and I think that's another thing that we see between Niger and Haiti. We see these neo-colonialist countries speaking for the oppressor, and we gotta be like, hey, we don't roll with y'all either. Like, if y'all gonna support them, we'll support y'all.
But it's also like what the chairman has been talking about for years in terms of the weakening of imperialism, the crisis of imperialism, and the same old guard is not able to do and move and act in the same old way. And even though like the new way, right, may have a different face, most of it is still the same old way. And so, we can't be distracted by whether or not the AFRICOM has a black general now, as opposed to a white one.
The Zapatistas have a really good saying about the hydra of U.S. imperialism, right? So we all know what a hydra is. The mythical creature, you cut off the head, 3 grow back from whatever, I think Greek mythology. And, they talk about how U.S. imperialism, the way that it functions as a hydra, is that it doesn't just grow 3 random faces. It grows 3 faces that look like yours. And I feel like that is like exactly basically what's happening, where we see, a lot of like black countries as being represented in these like imperialist forces, because basically the hydra of U.S. imperialism, they know that, if it's a white face, then we're going to rise up. But if it's 3 black faces, a woman, maybe another marginalized person of some kind, and then we're like, well, at least it's a woman I'm being oppressed by this time. At least it's a black person this time.
I think that's important. Like the neo-colonial question is really, really key here, because I mean, of course, everywhere where there's a primarily population of black folks, neocolonialism has been installed for decades, so they already know what's up, and they often call it corruption and things like that. You can't corrupt something that's already been corrupted. Like you've been installed in a place. And my concern
Like how
always
they try
is
and install democracy, but but we've never experienced democracy
never
in the
ever,
U.S.
like in my lifetime, like never experienced a true
Right.
democracy in any, in the US in particular, any type of move toward what do they call it? Right now it's a dual voting system, but a dual party system, right? Like as opposed to like a multi-party system, like in Venezuela, where and Cuba, where there's many different political parties who have power in different areas of the country. And that's just not how it is. And that's really representation of the people as opposed to these two party system that the United States has and then tries to implement in different places around the world, which doesn't work.
Correct.
Yep.
And so when people's like, when the US is like, oh, we're trying to spread democracy, and it was just like democracy in the US doesn't work. And then your type of democracy, which of course is oppressive and exploitative, you cannot expect that to be somewhere, deposited somewhere else. And my always also my concern is also just like, and I was speaking at a local protest at the French embassy in Washington D.C. and I was just like, we have to just be clear. And if we say imperialism is not just a French imperialism. Imperialism is all the way around imperialism. So if we're saying down with colonialism, down with imperialism, we have to be clear that that means everybody who's an imperialist and
Correct.
everybody who's a colonizer. Otherwise, then we're saying that only the French is a problem.
Right.
Everybody
We
else is
okay with
cool.
being we okay with being subjugated,
Yeah,
as long as it ain't them.
yeah.
Which
And
no,
that's
we
just
want to
not
be
how
free.
we seeing it. You know what I'm saying? Because the Nigerians have, a basic, demands. Like we need access to our resources. We want to be able to use the Ukrainian. What was
Uranium.
it?
Uranium.
Ura-
Um,
Uranium to actually power our lights. You want to be able to have road and good foods, and it's like one of the poorest nations in Africa, and that obviously has been under the watchful eye of the United States and the French governments and other governments too that have held together that regime, the 50-year legacy regime of father and son and son and son, who have been in power in Niger for decades, and so it's an oversight of that sort of exploitative stuff that happens in Africa, and people were just done with it. Like, how can when you push people to the edge, what do you expect? But also, the United States and the French and every other colonizer is very knowledgeable about the conditions on the ground in these places. So I am not putting it past them to install somebody or to prop
mhm.
up somebody who's also talking about ending imperialism and
Right.
ending
I
colonialism.
mean, think about Gabon,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
right there. I don't know if have you all seen the memes? Tell me you've seen the memes.
I have not seen the
I
memes.
haven't
Oh
seen
my god. So the old leader of Gabon, who's been the leader forever, he 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 put out this impassioned plea, which, by the way, Gabon is also a francophone country, and the
Mhm.
plea was in English, which I think is very interesting. Who were they talking to? Which
you know who
which
they
English
talking to.
speaking government were they talking to? Obviously US. But the new government that was installed, I mean, it's like a relative, it's still somebody that's part of the Bongo family. And there's a lot of things that point to, there might be some kind of US involvement. And so they can utilize the instability, they can utilize a leader's unpopularity to just install new one of their leader. But I recommend going finding the memes, because there's basically they put like a palm wine beat in the background, or palm wine kind of like because he has this whole thing where he says make noise, like he's telling the anglophone world that make noise because he's been thrown out of the palace, and that now
Mhm.
he doesn't know where his family is and all this other stuff. And so there's people dancing in the background like make noise. And so it's hilarious. And also, I'm suspicious.
Mhm.
It's too perfect. Something about that, it sets off a little bit of alarm bells in ways that Niger doesn't yet. But,
Yeah.
again, that remains to be seen.
Let's talk about some of the reasons why people are having coups, like these African countries are having coups. I mean, all of us. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Coco.
It's very material to me. It's very, one of my favorite shirts and sayings is colonialism causes climate change.
Mm-hmm.
The people in Niger, they're grind, like you're mining, so you're breaking the ground, and we know that all the ground is connected. If you like earth science, like third grade science teach you that the whole world's connected by, these topical plates and everything like that. So if you're mining into the ground, you're affecting and you have deforestation, and the soil, that the people are not able to grow their own food. So they're getting food shipped in internationally. Their resource, this uranium, that what is it? It's not uranium. Um, but the mineral resource is getting taken from their land and sold at 90, like 900. They buy for like $2 a unit, and it's
Oh
being
no, I think
sold
it was
by
90
France for
cents.
like
I think
$200 a unit.
yeah, it was like 90 cents they sell it to France
Correct.
for.
Mhm.
And
And
then
then they
France
sell it
sells it
for like
for
two
200
two
bucks.
40.
But we have to be really clear about like the mining aspect of it, because it's not just, oh, we're going to process it here. It's a digging up of the ground,
Correct.
putting the dirt and everything along with the dirt inside of a train that ships it to the port. The port then takes it to wherever it's going in Europe, where they process it and get rid of the dirt. So not only is like the minerals from there, like the whole dirt, the whole earth,
Correct.
Africa is
The
being
whole
shipped,
very
you know,
material.
yeah, very, so it's like, and also like, we've been talking about this as well. Like Africa is so rich and abundant in resources, and it should not. This is the one place on the face of the planet that should never have
Has
any sort of issues. Like it should, if left to the administrators of the land, right? Like the people who are indigenous there to take care of it, and even in utilizing those indigenous practices to kind of cultivate food, cultivate the things that we need from the land in order to survive, and more than just survive, but to thrive. Then I think that we have a different aspect of what Africa looks like right now. Because even desertification, I never say that word right, is a byproduct of imperialism, right? Like what I'm saying, the increased amount of land in the Sahel of Africa that is becoming more and more desert is in response to the exploitative nature of imperialism in the continent of Africa. And this is a problem overall, because people go to these environmental summits talking about, we need to make the developed nations pay more for this type of exploitation and that type of exploitation because we are suffering. And the only way that you can really rid yourself of the suffering is to overthrow your relationship, destroy the relationship that you have to the parasite that is taking everything from your land. Other
correct.
than that, negotiating on their platform, on their venue, is ridiculous. I remember one year the United States was like, we're not even going to sit in this conversation. We're going to leave while y'all figure that out. They got up and left when he was talking about climate change. It's like, we ain't doing none of this. All right, but y'all figure that out. And
Right.
that's the position that they've taken, in
And
terms
I
of their.
remember Obama went on like a whole tour where he was telling African countries that the African countries, which contribute maybe 0.05% of all climate change, like they have to be, more restrictive. They have to, figure it out and consume less. This is Obama telling this to the African countries, that they're the ones that have to consume less, not the US, not the largest consuming country that has ever existed in human history.
Right.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to have any restrictions on our consumption habits,
But I
but
think when you meet
they
when
do.
you meet the oppressor on these levels, that's what they tend to do. Like the exploit, like the amount of rubber trees that are being taken down, the deforestation of Congo, which is
So,
one of the three largest rainforests in the world. The desertification of Africa, which is one of the largest continents in the world. And like these are having implications not just on the African continent, but for the entire world in terms of like the
yes.
environment and how. So it's not even just a matter of just like, we need these resources to live. It's like, you are, by attacking Africa in this way, attacking its people, attacking its resources and the land base, you are creating an environmental problem that is going to go way beyond just the who's in power at this moment. Like you're destroying, the climate, the earth, the atmosphere around us, and just like they did when they stole African people.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that the history of capitalism in general is the history of externalization of impacts, right?
Mm.
So, white people really wanted delicious foods, high quality cotton gowns in 100-degree weather, fluttering
Tobacco,
around and these wigs, and they wanted all these things, but they didn't want to actually like grow the
do it.
food or like grow the cotton or like make the clothes or do any of that stuff. They just wanted to have it,
Yeah.
right? So someone else has to do it. They have to externalize the impacts of hard work, onto someone else. And the larger the consumption gets, the more the externalization happens of the impacts. And we see that now where we're consuming all these things, but it's the global south, it's Africa, it's Southeast Asia, it's South America that are like experiencing most of the consequences. And so their mindset is that they will just be able to externalize those impacts forever, and that there will be one island where the few rich people can go while the other an entire
Hey.
universe is on fire, and they will still, their white privilege will still somehow keep them magically safe. I mean, it's a form of magical thinking, and it's also like a religiosity. Like capitalism is a religion to people. Like this is a fairy tale to them. This is a mythology. This is something that they have to believe because of their faith for this system, because they don't even want to imagine anything less or different. This is really like almost a religion to the capitalists.
Yeah, white people ain't gonna go on no island. They're going to space.
Yeah, that's it.
They go into space to escape the devastation that they're causing on our planet, and I think also is I wanted to say this too, like people tend to think that human beings are some alien form of life form on this planet, that we don't, subscribe to the same kinds of requirements as a animal being like elephants and dogs and cats and other side of wild animals. Like we are of this planet, and so when you destroy it, like you destroy us. And these are the things that are responsible for the capitalism is responsible for. And I didn't want to make this a like environmental discussion, but that's what
But
it
it
ends up
is.
being. Like really it's an overall conversation around, it's so many factors, right? The military occupation of Africa and the continued exploitation. And I'm really like for me, I'm always like on my edge of my seat, just trying to wait and see how things turn out. Like when people were excited about the revolution in the Sudan and like the what was it? It was the Arab Spring at one point. It was just like, yeah, get
What's
them.
weird, they don't refer to this as the Sahel Spring. Why
Mm-hmm.
why is the Arab Spring so inspiring for humanity, but the Sahel Spring or the Sahel Summer, which is what we've been experiencing, is scary or just something that Western, well, I know why, because their empires are falling, but they don't refer to our liberatory struggles in the same way that they do a lot of the other Arab countries. And I think that's because sometimes there are color revolutions that happen everywhere. And I'm hoping that this what's happening now is not one of them.
I mean, I think that the crisis of imperialism is like everywhere. And I think more and more people, whether you're in the military or not, are seeing that something has to change because we can't survive in these conditions much longer. And when people talk about colonialism and direct colonialism is over, but really having an understanding that everything that happens and everywhere is political. And then particularly in Africa, where the world is, Africa is an object to people. It's not the subject of history. It's an object that can be shifted and played around. And whoever has control over this region has control over that. And so Africa is the position. And Chairman always says, like, everybody has an Africa plan, but Africans, like, so, and the African Union is not the African plan.
No.
Africa plan. ECOWAS is not
Equals,
the African
equalize, or
plan.
whatever is
No,
not.
no. And it's hard because there's not one African state that we can really see that has a long-standing trajectory of really defending Africa and defending the people and have an environment in which the
Trying
people
to
are
be.
thriving. And that's hard because you're living in 54 different Africas when you're in Africa, right? Like there's always some enemy right next to you, and somebody's playing the position to that prime minister or president of the country right next to you. So it really makes it difficult for you to, if you exert yourself a little bit to win. And also see that like these presidents might be like handed shit by the colonizers, right? And then at the same on the back end, they be like, "Oh, we got forced out. Oh, the U.S. is coming for us." And we saw that with Saddam Hussein, and some other people who have always who've been connected with the U.S. government, and then became the enemy of the U.S. and European imperialism. So
And from what I understand, even the leader of the junta in Niger, he has U.S. trained, military trained. So, you know,
yeah, the UN. He did peacekeeping missions for the UN.
right,
He was educated, even though he graduated college in Niger. He was educated and trained militarily in different places around the world. Now, I'm not so skeptical about that because where else are you going to get tip top
Right.
training from the imperialists?
right.
But just like the spook who sat by the door, there's still potential.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, and like I mean, like you said, what are the options? The options are UN training or like Boko Haram. Like,
right,
I mean, like I personally, might say that the UN has more options, even though I hate the UN as an institution, but to be able to just use the training they give you and the connections to be able to like further your own plans versus like Boko Haram, like obviously they're not going to just let people go and do neither does the UN, but like I think that you can make strategic alliances, between countries through these colonial institutions. You know how like when I don't know what kind of work environments you've been in, but you have the work environments where it's like mostly white people, and then you have the black folks that are like, let's go over here and scheme a little bit because these
right.
white people are on something. I imagine, I hope something like that is going on at these, UN trainings, but who knows? Who knows really?
So part of that too.
Go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Carmen Coco.
No, and I was gonna say even bringing that whole the whole idea going to the what Chairman called the war on ideas, the war on terrorism. You know that idea of terrorism has been the imperialists, the colonizers' way into these countries. And one thing that Niger has been able to contain is their the terrorism problem. So you have while over the summer you had what they said like 4,000 deaths. 77 were in was in Niger, which is substantially low compared to the other countries that are in that area. And even those deaths were on the outskirts, so that's not even leaving what I am impressed about. It's not even leaving an option for the other colonizers like U.S. to come in and say, "Oh, you guys have a terrorist problem. Let me go over there and get into your business." So that's one of the things I commend because they have been able to, pretty much keep the terrorism, out of the picture and as a non-factor to, attract these European countries to come in and do what they did to Libya, what they did to Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan, which is to, obliterate the structure that the people have for themselves and take resources.
Well, I mean, I think also part of that is maybe not just not to diminish, what they've accomplished as a new government, but thinking about the history of quote unquote terrorism. I mean, there's always a pattern, a very specific pattern that just is not the case in Niger, and so that pattern is U.S. is mad at Russia, U.S. empowers and funds religious extremists in Russian-controlled territory. Religious extremist fights Russia. Russia leaves. Religious extremist takes over. U.S. points at religious extremists to say terrorism, drops bombs, takes over the natural resources of that company, et cetera, et cetera. So that whole history just isn't there. And I think that's also part of it too, is that we have to we have to be real that a lot of the things that we consider to be terrorism are things that are like inflicted, by the U.S. itself, and we've seen that in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in a lot of other places,
Yeah.
and I think that helps not having that history. They don't have that history, and it remains to see about Ukraine. I mean, like, I think that Ukraine could very much go the way of Iraq, Afghanistan, and
Mhm.
Zelensky. He better watch out, because the U.S. likes to make alliances and then end up turning its back on those alliances for political gain. And we
Right.
see how unpopular the Ukrainian war is with the U.S. With the U.S. people in a lot of ways, and it's gaining more and more unpopularity. It's only a matter of time for the U.S. turns their back. But that's their problem. That's the
Right.
Europeans' problem.
That's what
Luckily in
I'm tired
Africa,
of going through.
I mean, I'm happy that they're seeing that, that a lot of the leaders are not making these kind of deals with the devil anymore, because they see what happens. I mean, it's only the Europeans that are stupid enough to continue to make these kind of deals. The
Mhm.
Africans know better by now, and I
Yes.
think that's working in our benefit.
I think what's happening now is like there's more leverage, there's more contending opposition to the hegemony that the U.S. has had. France is, even though they're still, former French colonies, like French is really not like one of the major players. Like they've been struggling. There's been protests in France. There's been
They've been had
chaos, and this France is like just trying to keep it together, and that's the opportunity. That's when you strike. It's when the colonizer nation is struggling and they're in crisis. That's when you get in the guts, and start to
right.
punching them out because they're weak already. And so United States is still in the struggle though, like trying to position themselves. And United States is not as invested in keeping France there, even though France is a sort of like a figurehead for United States politics anyway. In the region, it's like, okay, these are your former colonies. Okay, you administer that, but we really control the thing. We really control this this place. And I was looking at the video you sent, Jay, and there was one brother who was talking about the Marshall Plan and how after World War II, like the Marshall Plan was a grant that was given to Europe by the United States, and that allowed the United States to really take power in Africa and over the former colonies of the people of the Europe that has been devastated by colonialism. I mean, devastated by the World War II, the Second Imperialist War, as the chairman calls it, Second Imperialist
Yeah,
War, right?
second fearless
The
war.
Second Imperialist War, and in France, in order not to have the United States have leverage over it to this level of what it could be, they themselves becoming a colony of the United States. They was like, we got to position these colonies so that we can make resources separate from what the United States government is doing via this separate from what the United States government is giving us in terms of this grant um, that funded basically the rebuilding of Europe after the Second Imperialist War. And we had to see like Africa rescues Europe through this process again, because all of the former colonized were devastated. Their countries were like rubble. You know how Iraq and Afghanistan, all these places look like now? That was Europe after the Second Imperialist War. And they dug themselves out of that through the colonies. Um, and we have to be clear that Africa is always solving the problems of the colonizers because the colonizers have had control. And I think what we're seeing now is Africans like we have to solve our own problems. And I truly want that Africa, because I want it, because I want to be in Africa, y'all.
Right.
I want to be in a free and live. I want to be home, y'all. I don't want to be here anymore. Like I want to be home. I want to be all over Africa, and I want Africa to solve problems, and I want
For
African
Africa.
people to
Yeah.
get it together. Get some revolution, like get some theory. Get African internationalism and actually organize to free Africa from the confines of imperialism and overthrow
Yes.
colonialist control of our continent. We got to get rid of them because I want to come home.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I want to harken back to one thing that you said before, which was that, you attack the enemy when it's already weak, when there's
Mhm.
internal contradictions and divisions that are making it more vulnerable. And the fact is that the US is, pretty strong still. And 30% of the world's natural resources are still in Africa. And the
Mhm.
US needs those resources. Like, we're talking about global warming and changing everything to electrification and electric cars and
Yeah.
batteries and solar power. All of that requires lithium and cobalt. The
Mhm.
lithium is in South America and cobalt is in Congo and like West Africa. So they need those they need those minerals for the green revolution that they're trying to have, that's supposed to save all the Americans from the upcoming,
Right.
devastation of the planet. So the dome that we're going to be building or whatever that's going to protect us from the earth imploding is going to be made out of minerals that are all coming from Africa.
Don't come out.
So,
Yes.
they um they actively contribute to the instability. They actively prevent Africans from solving their own problems. And even when they do, like, Africans do try to solve their own problems, like, for example, making deals with China, which like, for all intents and purposes, like, I know China is no innocent player in all this, but I also know that China forgives most of the debt that they give out. They're not like the IMF that ensnares people, generations of people into debts forever,
Yeah.
with these interest rates and all that. Like, they don't do that. They build high speed rails and hospitals all over the continent you know they make trade deals, right? Like, it's mutually beneficial, versus like when Africa's dealing with the US, it's not mutually beneficial at all. It's 100% extractive. And
100%
so,
parasitic.
yeah, exactly. So, I think that on the one hand, part of it is on us as Black people in the belly of the beast to be, helping us bring about the
Yes.
instability that has to happen
Yes.
for the US to lose its
Yes.
status as, the world's police, like, so, like, if we abolish the police here, it'll be a lot harder for them to be the world police, elsewhere.
Right. Elsewhere.
So, like, we need to contribute to, like, make that even possible, because US interference, US will not allow independence, will not allow Africa to take care of itself, because it's taking care of itself, then it's not taking care of the US and Europe
Mhm.
and the US's economic interests.
Yeah, like I was saying, like the U.S. and all the other colonized have created a place where they've made the so-called third world a plantation, and that they farm and they extract from and use labor in, and to process all the things that they need in the metropoles. And so it gets really, I agree with you what you said too, Jay, in terms of like the weakening of imperialism has to be where there's crisis in the metropole itself. Like there has to be serious like struggle that the United States is contending with. And right now, I think mostly in the US it's electoral politics. There's not really that much groundwork happening in terms of like struggle. And maybe it is like on a small scale, like in communities and things like that. But I still think a large majority of people thinks that they can win a political position through the voting process, which, has typically not typically, never ensure, Black self-determination or any other colonized person self-determination in the United States. And so, I say armed struggle a lot. I be talking about like we got to get to the streets, y'all. But like, and I recognize that is a huge, huge undertaking that is serious. And I don't say that in a minimal way. Like, but that's what it's going to take, and we have to be able to prepare ourselves to make that struggle at some point.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that armed struggle, or any kind of struggle without a clear strategy, is
Hmm.
suicide. And
Yeah.
not the revolutionary suicide like He
Right.
Newton was talking
Like
about, the
Dr.
stupid suicide. So, like, I think that we need to be clear
Yeah.
about our hypotheses, about what we're doing and why, and for what purpose, and what we think will happen. And if that doesn't happen, or if something different happens, how we're pivoting that strategy, and all of these things. And I think about like the George Floyd protests,
Mm.
and I pissed off a lot of people in my life by calling them the George Floyd parades. And they were like, "Why would you say that?" And I was like, "Well, if it was a protest, who was the organization that you were protesting with? What
Right.
was the strategy? What
What
was
was
Right.
the
that
outcome?
platform?
What was the demands?" And then
Hmm.
Yeah.
they just kind of look at me like, and I'm like, "Yeah, 30,000 people in the streets here where I live in Portland. For what purpose?
Right.
What changed?" you know? And so, like, we have all these people marching, doing these things. They're not thinking about strategy. They're not fitting
Mhm.
it into like a plan of how, we win our liberation. And if we don't have a plan, then we're just flailing.
But that's how the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie infiltrates these sort of things. Even with the
George Floyd.
no Mike
Oh, Mike Brown.
Mike Brown protests, like all of those protesters then became employment and got gained like the head ones gained employment through a process of Soros and some other kinds of money that was put into those to kind of make sure that whatever that and Floyd, whatever is being done is being really funneled into the democratic process.
Hmm.
And that in order to, stop what the impending result could be, which is like armed struggle, like there are other kind of things that are happening that prevent that from happening, or not prevent, it could still happen, but sideline people. So then you have to ask yourself, if I'm one of those people, like, is the revolution sacrificed to the fact that I get now $100,000 for being the head of this organization and I'm funded through this,
Yeah.
or is it I need to make the revolution because we got to get free, we got to free this land
Right.
along, because
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah,
And
good.
I think we need to be clear that the stakes are like really, really high.
Yes.
Because not all the Mike Brown protesters or the previous protesters sold out. A lot of them were
Right.
murdered. A lot of
Yes.
them
Yeah.
are missing to this day. A lot
Yeah.
of them have very mysterious deaths. I
Yes.
think we all know what happened.
Yeah.
And so, going back to what you said about armed struggle, a lot of I think what armed struggle needs to be is like defensive,
Yeah.
because when we do actually start to fight and win, then, they come after us.
Hmm.
And they are not shy about using violence and covering
Oh,
up
yeah.
deaths. And, like, we know that the police lie. Like, we know that that black people are easily sacrificed, and that people do the little march and they move right on. But for a lot of these protesters that were mysteriously died, there was no march for them. There was no nothing. People were just like, accepted the narrative and moved on to the next protest. And I think we also need to be like, looking at like what is happening to the true leaders that are actually sticking to their values, and like how are we, telling the story of like, the disappearances and the deaths.
Yeah. I think also too, like within those marches is like a very liberal politic that's being explained too. Yeah, in terms of like how do you fight, or just like you call it the parades. Like, for us it was like fist up, fight back, right? Like the African Youth Social Party was like fist up, fight back, we intervening, not hands up, don't shoot. Like
Right.
fist up, fight back. Because that's what you have to do in order to really, get freedom. But I think what you said is really like the overarching theme. Like we just want something to happen. We don't know what it is because people are not informed by political theory. They're not informed by any strategy. They're just going along with the masses' response to a social condition, as opposed to being able to organize and lead those masses. Because I've been to many of those protests, and oftentimes I'm the only one with a clipboard or somebody else,
Right.
what I'm saying? Like, or trying to organize and bring people to a meeting or something, as opposed to just being out there.
It's very performative. It's
Yeah.
performative. I mean, it's like we talk about corporations being performative, but even as a people, we've been very performative. If it's not through organization, if we not organizing, it's we just performing. I mean,
Yeah.
like to me, the whole idea of good trouble is very performative because ain't no organization going on. Where do we go from here? After you lead that protest, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What did you do to ahead of that protest? Did you organize? Like who? What are you there for? You know,
Hmm.
is it just to highlight? Defund the police. But if you defund the police, what is your strategy after that? Like, what is it? We have to have organization,
That's
and
true.
like we have to have organization in Niger that works with that's why the beauty of African internationalism is that wherever we are, there's organization.
Hmm.
Mhm.
If you join the African internationalism, you're connected to an organization that can support and be in solidarity with you. And you know I don't want the thousands of students that's protesting in Niger to feel like they're alone, or
Right.
that they get exhausted. We get exhausted when you go through those protests. You you go in and out of jail with protests. You get exhausted. You get mentally, physically exhausted. We get exhausted doing our work here because we still have to perform in this system, and then take whatever sliver of time that the system give us and apply it to, instead of watching TV, we meeting and organizing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's one thing that you said that had me thinking about just liberalism in general and just like how it functions. And you talked about like how a lot of this activism work we see is like performative, and I think because it's divorced from like material realities, right?
Mhm.
And that's like the basis of liberalism. That's how slave owners could talk about peace and liberty and justice while owning and sexually assaulting human beings on a daily basis, and could still go and write this document about about fundamental rights, and so the divorcing from material realities is such a huge part of our society right now that I don't think people even know what it means to like have true resistance, or like be in true resistance, or be in true struggle. All they know is like what they've seen on TV. They know the narratives around the civil rights that the status quo shows us, which is not
Mhm.
like necessarily what actually happened. And like I think that people are just sort of like working with the information they have, which is so limited, as like the US is the most highly propagandized
Man.
nation in the entire
Yeah.
world, like by far. And people are constantly like, it's a constant process of indoctrination that's happening, just living here, which, I know we're going to talk about this later, but which is why the cadre school, to throw in a quick plug,
Yes.
I feel like it's so important to get people to learn how to actually, get involved in stuff. So,
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said before in terms of like China too, and just how people position, how African nations position themselves in Africa, because making relationship and partnerships with different other countries that doesn't have like colonial history in Africa, like France and Europe. I mean, in Europe and United States. Well, United States doesn't have a colony in Europe, but colony in Europe, but they're there. But like, but also just looking at the fact that not everything that China does is something that's beneficial to the masses of African people, and it also throws in a real financial motivation, particularly for leaders to do business with them, because even when I went to Sierra Leone and there was a what they call a Chinese hospital in Sierra Leone that the people could not get into. Like they could not go there. They had to still go to the village clinics because they were not allowed in this institution that had the high quality stuff in the capital. So like there are still this perception, and I had written something, I had did a video somewhere on YouTube, sorry, not somewhere, on YouTube there. And I talked about like China and Africa, and this one guy from China was just like, "What? Don't you think it's different? And we're helping Africa." I'm just like, "No, Africa needs to help itself." And when you come into an equal partnership with Africa and not just one African state, then that's what we're talking about, an equal partner. That's like an equal and equitable, response to one another, and that's that you are on level ground, but you're playing your position just like everybody else is playing their position. India, Indonesia, Turkey, Europe, all these people are playing their position in Africa. And Africa needs to play our own position and recognize that, yes, you can leverage people's interest in your country, but you can't do that you can't do that by sacrificing the interests of the people
yeah.
and ignoring what is necessary for the people, not just, I'm just going to make a little bridge here and then that's it. Like, where's the forward development on the ground? Yeah, what's the forward development on the ground? Let's talk about on the ground because we want to switch on
Okay.
over to Haiti and the
See,
Africa connection to what there's a deeper one than what's currently happening because Kenya is
old
not first happening.
Hispaniola.
Yeah, but go ahead, Comrade Coco. Start.
Yeah, so like, I'm really, Haiti is, the only, African led revolution in the history of colonialism. And we're kind of seeing them come again with what they're doing right now, which they're like ousting, they're saying, let's oust out our own gangs. Let's, these gangs that are, being, neo-colonialism, And I'm just really impressed with the people of Haiti, and I want, foreign powers to just stay out of it. And that's what the people want. They're like, look, we've had enough of y'all trying to come in here and correct our problems. Let us handle it. Stay out. And we see neocolonialism in the form of Kenya being on the ground to protect, the neocolonialist, puppets that have been, pimping out Haiti since the Haitian
Exactly.
Revolution,
Mhm.
basically. They're like, look, stay U.S. stay out, because U.S. came in like, oh, they're rescuing Haiti from the French, and just went on to further exploit, dig up aluminum, dig up what's the other mineral out there? They digging up these minerals, which is, again, we're seeing the climate issue come back up. Like, the climate issue is what is fatiguing the people, because they can't eat. I remember being a kid, and they were and learning about Haitians eating mud pies. And I'm like, the same mud pies we play eat in the backyard. And it was like, yeah, but that's what they eat. They eat clay and put the clay in the side of it just to get some type of minerals. And it's like, and that's all due to deforestation and mining. I mean, think about what the fight, the protest against fracking. Fracking here in western northwest U.S. They're like, oh, don't frack over here, because this is what is causing a material issue to the people that live out here. Just think about what is going on in these countries that they've been mining into for hundreds of years,
Yeah.
decades and hundreds of years, knocking down, you have, going back to science, those, when you have the earthquakes are just not coming out of anywhere. They're coming
Mhm.
out of them disturbing the the what's they called, the topical plates. I can't think of the
Mhm.
science name right now, but
Yeah.
I'm just really, the Haitian people are really, leading, they're leading a struggle right now.
Yeah, and one thing that's another huge thing I think it's important to mention real quick about part of the issues that Haitian people have been having to deal with like the U.S. influence is how remember how Bill Clinton went to Haiti with all of this. There was this green revolution where he was bringing all these genetically modified rice seeds
And
that
corn.
were
Right.
not nutritious, that ended up destroying the soil. And they deforested, as you said, all of this land for both mining but also for this monoculture.
Hmm.
And so there are, when earthquakes happen, yes, there are things that you cannot necessarily control, but there are also ways that you can mitigate the damages. And
Correct.
so, like, for example,
True.
trees are shock absorbers of the earth.
Mhm.
And so when there's an earthquake, a lot of times the trees can absorb the shock. They can do these things. There was no trees, so we saw massive mudslides and the mass death that
Mhm.
happened with the Haitian earthquakes that they still really like haven't recovered from. And of course, the Red Cross coming in, making billions of dollars and not doing a damn thing. And so that is just like also a huge part of the history and part of the intervention. But in terms of this like recent intervention, it's just interesting to see how it feels like Kenya is trying to use this to gain favor with the like Western imperialist forces, by they
See
deploying what, like a
how
thousand
good
thousand
buddies we
officers
are.
to restore order, working with CARICOM. And I mean, all this is going to do is just bring more suffering and devastation to the Haitian people.
Haitian
And
people.
all of the time that the UN has had missions to Haiti, none of the missions restored order or delivered peace. Not one of them. They only deliver in giving these neo-colonial and colonial governments groundwork to be to and like really fortify their military skills in a war zone, really, that they've created, that the United States government, that France created, that Canada created. And they now send their military there through these UN peacekeeping missions to Haiti. And I'm just I'm like Haiti is like my love. I love it.
Yeah.
Haiti is like not only because this was the first African revolutionary successful overthrow of colonialism in the Western Hemisphere or ever in the world, period, right? But that the fact that the Haitian people are continuing to fight all the time,
every
and they
time.
have to contend just like they had to contend with the French, the Spanish, and the British
U.S.
military at when they freed themselves from slavery. They have to contend with the international military attacks every single year. The UN is nothing but that international attack on Africa. I mean
Mm-hmm.
international attack on Haiti, as
Haiti.
you know, from the very beginning. So even as soon as 1915 or a little bit earlier than that, we still see these international forces attacking Africa. And now the UN is saying that the Brazil is going to lead this minister, and it's going to include minister, which is the French acronym for the UN peacekeeping mission that was in Haiti from 2004, since they ousted Aristide from 2004 to 2019. So minister was there creating raping folks, delivering cholera, you know,
Right.
diseasing folks, like not creating peace. And it's a joint mission of France, Brazil, United States, and any other civilian group or organization that was a part of that peacekeeping mission. And now they're calling in Kenya Kenya is offering. They said the UN was like who's gonna deliver peace to Haiti now?
I go, massa.
And nobody else was saying nothing. And then Kenya was like, we might go. And then they was like, US was like, yeah, you should go. And now we now have another military intervention, even despite the fact that the Haitian people was just like, we don't want y'all intervention. We could figure this out. Get the hell up out of here. And they keep, they just can't let Haiti go. And I don't think they can't let Haiti go because they need to keep themselves on top. I think that it's a strategic motivation for that, obviously, because I think that if Haiti was to survive and win, and they are surviving, and if they are able to win, just like they were back in the day as a beacon of light for the entire African world at that time, that they are still the beacon of light. Everybody wants to see Haiti win, all the Africans anyway.
Yeah.
And I've also seen that some people have been, positioning Kenyan intervention as some sort of like Pan-African sort of support for ousting the gangs. And I'm just like, this is not what's happening here. Like, because they don't understand the political question, right? Like, this is not what's happening. Like, yeah, we're Africans together, to rest, control, and create peace for an African nation in Haiti. That's just not what's happening at all.
Yeah. That just reminds me, in 2019, there was this thing that was signed into law called the Global Fragility Act.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Donald Trump passes this thing where he passes it with full bipartisan support. Both the Democrats and the Republicans love it. And then it's endorsed by the Biden administration as a way to advance America's national interests on the world stage. Like, they're not even shy about saying these things. And basically, they have this Global Fragility Act that the U.S. Is able to define places as fragile and create a peace building strategy to stabilize conflict afflicted areas and prevent violence. And of course, this is not at all what's happening. If it's almost Orwellian in how it's named, because it's like the U.S. goes in, destabilizes things for their own financial benefit. Things go real bad, and then there's a humanitarian intervention, and then they go back in, destabilize things more. It gets worse, it doesn't get better with the more interventions that are happening by the US and these colonial powers. Yet they get to pass this Global Fertility Act that defines them as the peace builders, in a conflict-ridden world. Like, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous.
It's almost like having the International Criminal Court, but none of the United States people are ever put as
Right.
The U.S. passed a law. They passed a law that said that the U.S. military has automatic authorization to attack the International Criminal Court if they ever choose to prosecute any U.S. head of state. Like, we literally have a law that our military pretty much must attack them if they prosecute any. So it's not going to happen, because obviously they're not going to want to go against U.S. power.
But but ICC is like an American invention. Just like most of these sort of world tribunals and world institutions that
Right.
supposedly offer peace is really just a U.S. Creation.
They create these things and then they make themselves exempt from them.
But they also create these things, but then they let the neo-colonize. Like what I'm seeing in terms of the UN,
Mm-hmm.
the people, like even though like the U.S. administers it, look, but the actors and factors in there are people from so-called colonized nations who are actually creating these things. Brazil,
Right.
and what I'm saying, like all these other, like India, Pakistan, all of these people who are leaders in the specific roles in the UN are facilitating making judgment calls around what's happening in terms of like Security Council and other areas that the UN supposedly is overseeing. And I don't even, really fully understand the function of the UN other than just to be, an agent, an institution of imperialism. But, it's just the fact that, the US has its hand in every single thing, and particularly, what's happening in Haiti, because it's advantageous to them to control what's happening in Haiti and has been happening in Haiti.
Horror.
Yeah. I wanted to talk also more, like I was reading this article. I'm going to read a quote from it, and I forgot to say where it came from. It says on Friday, June 2nd, 2023, the United States Department published a press release written by Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken announcing the blocking of Laurent Salvador Lamothe, a former prime minister of Haiti between 2012 and 2014, from being able to enter the U.S. um, because they were accused of significant corruption, reporting that he misappropriated at least 60 million from the Haitian government's Petro-Caribe infrastructure investment and social welfare fund for private gain. However, Lamothe was a part of the Haitian Tête Calais, as I'm saying, or called the Haitian bald-headed party during the time of the regime of Michel Martelly, who was the president of Haiti. And it was heavily backed by the United States. So
Right.
they're accusing Lamothe of embezzling funds from the Haitian Petrocaribe, but they're the ones who was backing this government, Martelly's government, and most likely backing Lamothe and what his actions were. And it's only when it becomes visible to the surface
Correct.
that the U.S. starts to distance itself from certain people.
It's what I was talking about. Same thing happening with Ukraine, and they're
Mhm.
showing all this corruption, and like this is what I was also talking about, where hopefully the African nations are starting to know better than to make deals with the devils, because it always comes back to bite you when you make a deal with the US, because there's no integrity. There's no sense of the moral. I think that a lot of US officials and people in the military and all these things, they think that the US has inherent moral superiority.
Yeah.
So any atrocity, any evil that is committed for the sake of keeping the US on top is worthwhile, just because the US is an inherent good in their eyes. And so, they don't care about just turning their back on someone. They don't care on being two-faced. They will do it in a second. They gave him
Right.
that $60 million, said spend it how you like. And then when he spent it how he liked, they were like, "Oh wait, this probably
Oh,
doesn't look good.
yeah.
Let's it's probably a good time to throw this guy under the bus."
It's like the
That's how they
toxic
roll.
boyfriend.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like your toxic partner that you were dealing with. It's like, we're done with here.
Right.
And let's talk about the reason why Kenya is supposed to be going. What kind of violence they're trying to thwart? The gangs, right? These are the gangs that was created by U.S.
Right.
by the same people that are sent there to solve the problems, right? Like the UN, like the gangs are an invention of imperialism. They are there. The gangs were used by political parties in Haiti to exert their will with the masses, coerce the masses, and protect themselves. And so now you're seeing that these gangs who represent neo-colonialism and colonialism, but the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie, are now fighting for control, and they don't give a they don't care about the population of people. They never did. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But this is an invention of US of imperialism. I'm not going to say just US, because Canada's in there, France is in there, United States is in there. Really arming. Haiti ain't got no gun factory. Yeah, ain't nobody
Right,
in Haiti making
right.
guns, you know what I'm saying? And jeeps and stuff, ain't got ain't got these kind of facts. Who's making this stuff and who's supplying these gangs with these powerful
Right.
weapons?
We know the people know who's supplying them.
Absolutely.
We I shared a couple weeks back when we was first talking about this the African stream video that I show where they just like if Canada and the U.S. stop supplying guns, we wouldn't have a gang problem. I mean, it's the same thing here in the United States. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. These is kids riding around on bicycles with assault rifles. That's a real tangible thing that's going on right here in my city. Where's a 13-year-old getting a gun?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have we don't definitely don't make guns here. Like maybe if Cleveland made guns, we have some type of industry, but we and jobs, especially for the black men that's out here that's unemployed. We have a huge unemployment rate, but these people that's what they do. They supply the guns. They did it in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran. They supply the guns and they hide their hands. Like, look, I can't make it. Here in these states, the NRA say guns don't kill people. People do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? They have that theory everywhere. But if the guns were not in the gangs' possession, the people would have a chance to, hold people responsible who are, exploiting their own people who are, exploiting the masses of people.
And I mean, let's be clear though, because like in the US, any person can walk into a one of those expo centers
Yeah.
and buy a whole arsenal.
Yep.
I mean, I bought my firearms online. I don't know if they ever
Yeah.
asked me for an
Okay.
ID or anything. I
Wow.
just put in my credit card, and next thing you know, like in 10 days later, like they're not checking, and I think that's very intentional because having a constant free flow of firearms just continually circulating throughout the US allows a lot, like millions and millions of guns to get lost,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's not like that in other places though. Like you can't just buy an arsenal at take your kids to the expo center,
Right.
eat some popcorn and buy an arsenal. You can't just go on Amazon or like go on walmart.com and send ARs to your house like you can in the US. Like you can't do
Right.
that AAT. You can't do that in Niger. You can't do that in anywhere else other than the US. So like they're getting the weapons like from the US military itself, from the gun manufacturers who are like, let's also be clear that like the US military, it's not just thinking about like US interests. It is thinking about capitalist interests, and capitalism has
Mhm.
no borders.
Right.
Like the US government and the Canadian government and the French government are puppets of a neoliberal capitalist system.
Mm-hmm.
And those capitalists at the top of those systems, like they don't have borders. They don't have nationalities. They run everywhere. They control everything. They could, and so, they and part of those capitalists are also like weapons
Yep.
manufacturers that benefit from instability in a lot of places. And so, their sales go down and they're like poking the US like,
Hey.
you see some fragility in AET lately? Yeah, I think I did. I think I did see some fragility there. Why don't you spend $1 billion here on weapons, and then they get sent out, and at least like in Ukraine they've been reporting that like all of these weapons are missing. Everything they're sending to the
Yeah.
every week we hear like $60 billion there, $50 billion here. Again, every single week, like sending more and more money and weapons, and those things are disappearing as soon as they land. We don't know where they end up. We have no idea where that's just ending up.
Yeah. War is the business. And anytime there's any conflict in the world, the biggest, machine or weapons manufacturers in the world be like, okay, let's get going. It's a business, and the conflict
Yes.
is rooted itself really like Pakistan, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, all of these places, these conflicts, Vietnam, all the money that was being made through weapons manufacturing is billions and billions of dollars, and that's probably sometimes the economy of particular certain places. And I'm just thinking, like, in Haiti we see like these high power weapons, just like we see in our communities, just like Coco just said in terms of Cleveland. And people get guns from all different kinds of places. I have to purchase mine. I couldn't purchase mine online. Well, I could, but they had to send it
Yeah.
to a store that I had to go, what I'm saying? But the gun law, but the NRA in the United States is a huge lobby. Like they lobby, they make
With a
sure
lot of
that
money.
they make sure that and it's propaganda too. Like the propaganda is like, we're gonna watch this movie where we see this AR-15 in the movie, and the NRA is a part of that. It's like the police organizations are a part of these lobbies too, that make sure that the police are being shown in a good light, and all of these kind of
Or
things.
military and Marvel.
Exactly. Yes, like the Captain America and all this propaganda machine that we think is entertainment, but it's also propaganda in the belief that the United States is some sort of hero for the world, and that keeps people believe. I think that's part of
Yeah.
like the war of ideas that we've been seeing over and over again, and we have to learn to contend with that. That's why one of the first things that people do when they take over a country or they take power is they get control of the radio and the TV, because that's where you are able to talk to the masses, and that's where you're able to put forth your agenda. And that's what we're seeing, in many places. And in Haiti, I'm just like, these gangs that were created by US imperialism, by French imperialism, by Canadian, and people don't think about Canada like that.
Yeah. They
Canada's
don't.
up at the top.
Canada is
You
amazing.
know what I'm saying?
Hey, the
Canada is
main
out here like,
culprit. Hey.
okay, a boat. I'm like, like Canada, but Canada's a fucking colony. Like it's a
Exactly.
colony. Like there's indigenous people that were wiped out because of the French colonizers, wiping out indigenous people in Canada, and they're out here in these militaries, and they're over here moving and shaking to protect their interests. And it's really important for people to recognize Canada and Haiti, because they're one of the major players. They may not be a major player nowhere else in the world, but in Haiti,
They down
Canada
in
is a
Haiti.
major player. Okay. And so when we look at the destabilization of Haiti, we can't just like, oh, them Haitians can't get it together. I don't think any African thinks that, really. I don't think that nobody African on the face of the planet think that Haiti just can't get it together. There's always instability.
There's a lot of propagandized people,
Oh, that's true. That's true. But we also recognize like the history that Haiti
Right.
has never seen peace, except for maybe that period of time after that Haitian Revolution, where there was. But France was in there. Canada was in there right afterwards. Like, okay, you need to pay us back money for all the property we lost, which were people. And they was like, okay, in order to we gonna do it. And that's also thinking that you think that people are um finding your interest, like they equal, like you feel like you're equal now to the oppressor, and you think that because they're willing to come into a deal with you, they consider you their equal. They do not consider you their equal.
Correct.
And it's like, do you want to be equal to the oppressor? Like, so don't even give them any kind of play when we talk about entering into agreements with them, because these people are only there for their interests. What is our interest? And our interest is to be free and to have all the resources and to rectify our problems. And if those are not the things that are leading decisions, particularly for people who are leading countries and in government, then I don't, it's just time to overthrow this whole thing in my view. Like it's
Yeah.
over. We can't sacrifice, we can't resolve it, we can't, negotiate out of it. It just needs to be
And
removed.
it's all oppressed people.
Yeah, we
You know
just need
what I'm
to
saying?
have
We
our state.
all need
Yeah.
to go ahead and take down, cut the snake, take the head off, then the rest of the body to go with it so that it can't regenerate. It's
Jay was
because
talking about the Hydra. We need to cut
the
the head off and then
hydrogen,
throw the rest of it in the acid vat of acid.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Same
Well, in
acid,
the
the
story,
same acid they got.
yeah, in the story they cauterize the
Mhm,
hole where the head is. So
mhm.
they burn. So like I feel like that's symbolism for you cut off the head and then you burn it down. You got to burn the
Correct.
thing and then it won't come back.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have about 10 minutes left in the program, and so I've seen people commenting, and a lot of the questions has been like a lot of like, I appreciate y'all and things like
Yeah.
that. But like Coco raised a sub question: so why are we as women talking about this? Because it's in our interest to talk about it. Like we live in this world, you know? And the things, and most times when there's conflict that has deep and profound implications for the conditions of African women, I mean women, colonized women, and the children, vulnerable sectors of society, not only just African women and femmes, but like vulnerable sectors of society that were already on the fringes of society in the first place. And these sort of conflicts deepen those. So that's why, and that also lays the foundation for the US and any other so-called colonizing nation, not so-called colonizing nation, and say we have to go rescue the women and the children now. And we can't let them do that. As women, we can't say, oh yeah, we know this contradiction is happening to us now because of this conflict that's happening as a result of imperialism. But we also can't let imperialism say we got to come in here and rescue us. And they usually do that through NGOs, charity organizations, military sometimes.
Don't get your ball gown ready yesterday. You got to go to a ball and raise some money.
But like it's not even a question like of like our gender and why we should be talking about it. Why shouldn't we be talking about it, right? Like why shouldn't we be involved in the process to overturn the relationship that we as colonized people have with the oppressor? And we have to be engaged in these politics, not just as like, oh yeah, we don't want this person here, we want this next person out, but we have to be like, we have to know the nuances. And I think that this discussion that we've been having today has been talking about those nuances so that we are not just, sheep, but that we are critical thinkers that is able to, be aligned with strategy and create strategy ourselves when dealing with some of these contradictions.
Mm-hmm. And, I think it's also important to recognize like sort of women's kind of unique role in capitalism, which is probably, I would say, the most important role, which is the producer of workers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We produce the next generations. We produce the workers. We produce the soldiers. And so, women have to be complicit in that process to, produce a child that can grow up to be a soldier. Because I mean, I don't have kids, but no child of mine is going to be no damn soldier for imperialism. And so like something has to happen ideologically.
Yes.
For somebody to even see this as like an acceptable option for their life, and so that I feel like is where, women are very powerful. Even those of us like myself that don't have children, the aunties, the caregivers in different capacities. We need to be reminding people that like another world is possible.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot produce the next generation of drones, of worker drones. We cannot produce the next generation of like, militaristic super soldiers. We have to like nip that in the bud as soon as possible.
Yeah. And you've seen these US military ads where they like, you can come into the military and learn valuable skills. Like
we're just like playing a video game.
Playing a video game. I'm just like, that's how they win, people who don't have access to these ways of learning. They don't have access to college. So they like, you come to the military. But like even as a cook in the military, you know what I'm saying? You are a part of the US military machine. No matter how not frontline your responsibility is. And I know you're right. Like, I was like, my daughter, I was like, you was never, ever, there's never been a discussion in my house about the military. And if there ever was one, I'm like, you is never, ever. That
was my mom's stance too. Because I was like, I'm going to go to the Air Force. I'm going to do this. And my mother was like, oh, no, you're not.
No, you
I was like, I even connived and had the recruiters like, come talk to my mom. And my mom like, if you walk up this driveway, they will come get your body. You know what I'm saying? My mother was like,
get your ass out of here. But they're in the school, they're in the black schools, they're in the white schools, they are everywhere. And so like that's just one aspect of it too. Like there's also this thing where, mothers and are the ones that are trying to protect our children from the ills of the world. So we teach in some of our body language. Sometimes we are teachers of, comply, don't resist, because we care about our children. And in many ways, imperialism attacks mothers and attacks their children too as a way of control, right? That's why you see a lot of the times when there's conflicts that break out, women and children are like thrown into crisis as a way, because you ain't thinking about overthrowing a government when you're just trying to keep yourself and your children safe. Right. You know what I'm saying? Or overthrowing, you are taking up arms and shooting back because you want to just you want to be safe. And but oftentimes, women, colonized women in particular, are being used as a propaganda tool by the people who are attacking as a way to go in and rescue, but also as a way to, in terms of keeping society at a status quo. And, for us as women, like, I'm not interested in this status quo. Yeah, sure, you got a car, you got a job and stuff like that, but that's not life. Particularly when you see the conditions of my people. I can't go nowhere and be like, oh, we good, y'all. I can't go nowhere in the world and be like African people, like, we good. It's always like, I went to Colombia. I had to step over shit in the road in a black community because there was no plumbing and all of the feces was in flooding out during the time of rain and downpour. We had no roads and electricity, and even though the people are great and they live in these conditions like some of these charity people, but they live so they're still, they don't have the hardest conditions, but they doing okay. No, I'm not. I'm like, I want better. You know what I'm saying? And so our responsibility as African people, and particularly African women, is not to be cool with any of this and to resist in any way
Yes.
possible.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
would
been the
build
trajectory of
on
Black
that.
women too.
Yeah, I would build on that. And, we say African women must lead. We have to be, we can't be conscious, what they call them, conscious objectors, people that just like let the men handle it because I obviously not in the way of patriarchy, but in the way of colonialist rule, because the colonizers run in a patriarchy society. We don't, culturally, we don't, and we do have to have our say. We do have to step up for and avoid the men, or whoever is chosen using men to fall into that role, that pattern of individualism, and taking the 60 million when it really need to go to the people. We are there. We hold everyone
I don't
responsible.
want to hold men accountable for that, only because, as we said, women are complicit in
Oh yeah, yeah.
capitalism.
It
So,
complicit too.
child, it may be the men
We
on the
know,
forefront, but there's a lot of women on taking the cut. You know what I mean? And
right?
and sacrificing the interests of the people for whatever it is that the colonizer is given. So, like, I see that on a day-to-day basis,
On a
just in regular life.
day-to-day
In
basis.
regular life, you know what I'm
And
saying? So
then, like,
imagine
yeah,
if you
and then
let me
like what
feel
I
like,
was saying with the foundations
there's
and the
some sellout,
fundraising.
they sell out all the time. And I see this comment from King Kelvin Dorival, and he said that Haiti has everything it needs to succeed and prosper. We just need to eradicate the Haitian American Treaty of 1915 and that diabolical rights deal bill Clinton passed in 1996. I would say go a step further and just eradicate
Right.
colonizer, period. Because even
Eradicate
like
the
we've
flush them
seen
out.
that you can eradicate a bill, you can vote down something, and then they just come up with something else.
Yeah.
They do that all the time here. Like, they do it all the time. I'm like, we that could be a first step in making that move, but like we have to then use that as a precipice to move further, and get to the final conclusion, which will eradicate the parasitic relationship that we have with any of these colonizers anywhere on the face of the planet.
Mhm.
So I like this. This is really nice.
It was fun.
We didn't get to talk about some other stuff. We spent a lot of time on Niger, and I think in
Yeah.
that discussion we did talk about like Gabon and Burkina Faso and statements and things like that in Haiti. But there's a lot more to be said
Need a
about
part
other
two.
other news in the African world that is happening and continues to happen on a daily basis that deserves our attention and response. And maybe we will do another news and analysis show for our next the breakdown, and we gonna prepare for that. But I want to thank my co-hosts Jay Amaechi and Koko Lewis for all of your contributions for today's the breakdown. And I just think that this is an invaluable discussion, and it's an example too of the genius of African women, and especially when African women are take hold of theory and strategy and be able to think for ourselves, and how these, and look at the world as dialecticians and be like, come to conclusions based on relationships that people have, like, just don't be out here in the world just taking it in and being a consumer, but be out here making things happen. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and we really appreciate all of your comments and feedback, and we look forward to our next month when we have
Yeah.
our next round of the breakdown and African Women Must Lead. Uhuru.